I'm Brendan Vaughan, editor-in-chief of Fast Company, and this is the first episode of Office Hour, my show about what it takes to lead in a world that never stops changing. On today's inaugural episode, I'm talking to Liz Shuler. Liz is the president of the AFL-CIO and the leader of the American labor movement. This conversation actually took place the week after President Trump signed an executive order stripping collective bargaining and union rights from federal workers. The order is currently being challenged in the courts and remains in limbo. We get into exactly what this could mean for the roughly 700,000 union members working in the federal government. This is a wide-ranging and fascinating conversation and a critical moment for the labor movement. It's a challenging moment without question, but as you'll hear Liz say, sometimes the best organizer is a bad boss. Thanks for listening to my conversation with Liz Shuler. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, everyone. I am Brendan Vaughan, editor-in-chief of Fast Company. I am delighted today to be here with Liz Shuler. Liz is the president of the AFL-CIO. That is the Federation of Trade Unions, national and international, representing 63 unions and more than 15 million working people. Liz is essentially the leader of the labor movement. She is the first woman to lead the movement and to lead the AFL-CIO. She grew up in a labor household in Oregon and went to journalism school at the University of Oregon. So I like her already. Liz, feel free to ask me any questions during this as I ask you questions. So let's get into the interview. It is a complicated moment for the labor movement. Our president has essentially said federal workers no longer have unions. But let's start with a broad question. As the de facto leader of the movement, your number one job is to set the agenda for labor, but labor is not a monolith. It's not one thing. What is your overarching vision? What are unions for in 2025?
Well, unions have never been more relevant, I'll tell you that, because we're seeing still such great inequality in our economy. We're seeing people working harder than ever and struggling to keep up. And I think most people today still want that American dream of being able to support your family, have a good paying job, have health care and things like retirement security. Go figure, right? And be able to provide for your kids and have predictable scheduling so that you can take a vacation. So I think that's what we've always been for in the labor movement is the dignity and respect that goes along with work, having a stable job and pursuing that American dream. And it's been broken. And unfortunately, as the labor laws have been attacked over time by corporations, workers have had fewer rights and ability to come together in unions. And as unions have shrunk, our power in the economy as workers also has dwindled. So we can't demand more. And I think what we're seeing now is a full circle moment where there's a resurgence in the interest of people wanting to join unions. We just got some polling. 70% of Americans are pro-union, and 9 in 10 young people under 30 support unions. And so that's why we're seeing such a growth in interest. And really what we're seeing at the community level is people coming together collectively to demand more and fix this broken economy.
Help us understand a little bit more about your relationship to unions. I think people hear president of the AFL-CIO, they think you're out there negotiating CBAs and doing this sort of thing. That's the work of unions themselves. You're a federation. Give our listeners a little bit of a sense of what your job is there in terms of pulling together the sometimes disparate interests of all these different groups.
We are a coalition, and so we do have 63 unions. They're so different, right? We have unions in more traditional sectors like manufacturing and transportation, energy, but also part of the modern economy that's growing, care workers, folks in retail and hospitality. We have professional athletes. We have Hollywood actors. And a lot of attention was paid to those who went on strike a few years ago when AI was starting to invade the workplace and Hollywood, and actors and writers and performers stood up and said, we're going to use our union to fight back. And so that really put unions on the map again, I think, for a lot of people. But this idea that we all have a baseline that we fight for, good wages, working conditions, protections on the job so that when you go to work, that you come home safely, things that we take for granted now. Unions fought for over time, and in some ways, as corporations become more powerful, that they're more driven by profits and bottom lines, those are the things that often get compromised. And who can fight back? Well, workers fight back, and they do it better when they come together collectively in a union.
Is it hard to come up with messaging that applies to sort of everyone without watering down the individual primary goals of the groups, especially some of the bigger and more powerful groups within your constituency set?
Yeah, so each union, of course, has their own approach to the industry that they work in. And our job as a federation is to bring people together, again, under kind of what can we agree on? What is our baseline? What are we fighting for that really is a common denominator across every union? And in fact, I'm wearing a shirt that says it's better in a union because that says it all. No matter what type of work you do, no matter what union you're in, you are doing better when you're coming together, bargaining a contract, and negotiating for your fair share. We have lots of data around better pay for women, for example. Women make 22% more when they're in a union. People of color make more. So I think this notion of us all collectively coming together and being stronger appeals to no matter where you're from and what kind of work you do.
You mentioned the 70% approval rating of organized labor in general among the American public. Biden was one of the most pro-labor presidents in recent memory. He did a lot of good things that helped unionize workers, but about 1 in 10 Americans hold a union card, only about 6%. That number is about 6% in the private sector, much higher in the public sector. But those numbers did not move much during his presidency. And so I'm curious to hear, with those tailwinds, why didn't labor make more gains during the Biden administration? Not so much in the things that helped people that were already in unions, where gains were made, but just increasing the number of workers in unions across the country.
I'm so glad you asked this question because when those numbers come out, it's really frustrating because I don't think people understand how broken the labor laws are. That when people try to form a union, they are universally harassed, discriminated against, and usually fired. And that has quite a chilling effect on people. It's very risky for people to stand up for their rights. And when you try to form a union, you have to go through a process that then is recognized by the National Labor Relations Board. You have a vote. Usually, if the process goes well without all that union busting by the company, it does take a period of time and it takes stamina. And from what we've seen in most union elections now, the companies fight you tooth and nail. I'll take Amazon as one example, where we had warehouse workers who came together wanting better conditions. They wanted to come together and form a union, and they were surveilled, followed into the bathrooms to make sure they weren't talking to each other. They were monitored at traffic lights leaving the facility if a union organizer was trying to talk to them on their way out of work. So it was a big intimidation campaign. And so you can imagine how exhausting that is, how scary that is. And that happens at workplace after workplace throughout this country. So I think using that as one example, that's probably what I would point to is it takes an act of heroism to form a union these days with our broken labor laws.
How much of your job do you see as growing the total number of unionized workers versus taking care of the people that are already in your membership? And, as part of that answer, I know you have a goal to, I believe, create 1 million new members by 2030.
It was over 10 years at the time.
When you first announced it, right?
But we set that as a floor, by the way, not a ceiling. And so we've actually exceeded those goals if you look at, over a 10-year period. But there is this notion of balance, right? We have emerging industries that are growing and are largely not unionized. And I think you have, yes, the base membership, the industries that have long been part of our movement, which we want to preserve and maintain and continue to grow. But we also have our eye on the future. We know technology is affecting work. The needs at the workplace are going to be different. You're going to have a different demographic in the workforce. And we think that the labor movement can be the place to help people figure out what's next. And as you're working in a job and perhaps you're afraid that you're going to be replaced by artificial intelligence, that the labor movement is there to help you not only fight for respect and dignity and a voice, but also to plan for whatever transition might come next. We have been the largest provider of training and upskilling, second only to the U.S. military throughout history. And a lot of people don't know that if you add up all the capacity of the labor movement, we're like the third largest university system in the country.
So let's move into recent events, the Trump administration, part 2.0. And a lot has happened. So before we even get into what's happened since, let's talk about kind of what happened before. So the majority of union members certainly did back Kamala Harris in 2024. There were numbers about blue-collar America shifting significantly towards Trump, but union members still backed Harris, pretty definitively. But there were still, polls vary. I'm going to ask you if you have a number. I have seen anywhere from 40 to 45% did support Trump. Do you know the number of Trump supporters in your membership? And if so, how does that compare historically to other Republican candidates?
We, again, are not a monolith. As you said earlier, we definitely have membership across the political spectrum. In the last election, union members voted nearly plus 20 for Kamala Harris as an overall number. Now, within the labor movement, of course, there are these verticals with different industry unions that are within different industries and had a share of their membership, of course, that voted for Trump. But I would say that our message was an economic message. And when we were able to really appeal to our members based on, the things they cared about, their ears opened and they heard us and they listened. And so that result overall was a positive result for us. The problem is we weren't reaching enough working people writ large outside the membership of the unions. And so we keep saying if the labor movement was larger, if we had a bigger footprint and were able to talk to more working people, the result might have been different. So growing the labor movement, we believe, is a part of protecting our democracy, that we have the ability to talk to people one-on-one, to be a trusted source for information. In a world of disinformation and misinformation, we've found that we are a trusted messenger. So we have not stopped talking to our members. We have said this is something we have to continue to do year-round, 24/7, but on the issues. It's really not about politicians as much as it is about coalescing around the issues that matter. And so I would say that no matter which party you belong to, you care about making decent wages and having a good job that you can rely on, that predictable schedules and decent health care and retirement. And we want to elect people that actually believe in those values and support us on the issues that we care about.
Shawn Fain, the president of the UAW, the United Auto Workers, has come out, pretty strong in support of of Trump's announcement last week. I'm saying this in early April about the 25% tariff on cars assembled outside the United States. The UAW clearly thinks this is going to bring back a lot of manufacturing jobs to the industry. That's not necessarily consistent with, well, I'll let you speak to what your position is on that particular tariff and that particular industry. But the position on these kinds of announcements across the membership is like a far more nuanced response. So can you speak to that and sort of the differences that exist between the UAW's position on that particular thing and other things like it and yours?
Well, the UAW is a member of our federation and has a very long history in terms of trade policy and fighting for their members and what is fair in terms of competition and what we saw with the devastating impacts of NAFTA. And what we saw then was, of course, a massive offshoring of manufacturing jobs. Because of an unlevel playing field, we have seen, other countries take advantage of that. Low cost, low wage, unlevel playing field in places like Mexico and places like China. And so tariffs have always been used as a tool to try to level the playing field with the countries who essentially are cheating. We've seen currency manipulation in China. We've seen them paying a pittance for wages that how can you possibly compete against a country that is based on poverty? The UAW, of course, has a strong approach to tariffs in the auto industry, and every union and every industry has to mind the policies that are going to benefit their members. And so the UAW has come out very strong. The steelworkers, of course, there are a number of unions. But as a federation, we're balancing trade policy and how it impacts members across a spectrum of industries. And so what we have always said is the strategic use of tariffs can be a successful tool to leveling the playing field in terms of trade. And we don't agree that they should be used as a blunt object, particularly with a country that's a friend like Canada. We also have unions who have both U.S. and Canadian members. So we have been working with our membership across the board to make sure that the tariffs that we're in favor of be used strategically to punish the bad actors and reward our friends.
We are going to take a quick break, followed by more from my conversation with Liz. the reunification, if that's the word, of the SEIU, the Service Workers Union, and the AFL-CIO, which happened in January after being apart for about 20 years. Tell us about that strategically. Was that done with the Trump administration coming into power again? Was that timing coincidental, or was that part of a strategic effort to sort of become stronger as, the onset of what you would expect to have been an anti-union administration was about to take power?
It is so exciting to have the SEIU back at the AFL-CIO, and we have been, like you said, over 20 years. I watched it actually when I was still at my union, the IBEW, before I came to the AFL-CIO, watched the labor movement fall apart back then, and it's always been something that coming into leadership here seemed to make perfect sense that we should be together, and together we are stronger. And so it was several years in the making. When I came into this role as president, one of the first calls I got was from Mary Kay Henry, who was president at the time of SEIU, and we had built a relationship over time and started working more closely together. And my mantra is always, how is the Federation moving the ball forward for the entirety of the labor movement, whether you're in the Federation or not, moving the ball forward for working people, even if you're not in a union. And SEIU definitely shares that philosophy. So we were able to work more closely together over time. And as April was coming into her presidency, really getting granular about what this partnership would look like. And she and I share a lot of the same ideas around innovating the labor movement for the future and new models of organizing, the focus on organizing, kind of, how does the labor movement modernize to meet the needs of a modern workforce? So we are two peas in a pod. Now that they're in the AFL-CIO, they're really bringing a lot of creative energy to the table. And I think it couldn't have come at a better moment because of the fights that we face right now with this administration. And so we are locking arms and marching forward together in a very powerful way that I think is really meeting the moment.
And that took you from what, 13 million to 15 million?
Yeah.
Okay. Project 2025 telegraphed a lot of the Trump administration's moves. They said they were going to do it, and largely, in a lot of ways, they're doing it. So the executive order that Trump announced recently that effectively said that all federal union employees more or less no longer have a union. Let's pause there and just sort of talk about what a big deal this is and what a kind of shocking announcement this was, even knowing what was in the Project 2025 document. Hamilton Nolan, the labor activist and journalist, he had a memorable phrase. He called it the bombing of Pearl Harbor against the labor movement. Because of the chaos and just sort of overwhelming volume of announcements that are coming out of the administration on a daily basis, the news, huge though it is, did not really get the coverage that such an announcement, you would think would get. Before we get into that, what was your personal reaction to this news? How did it make you feel, for lack of a better way to ask that question?
It was an absolute gut punch, and I think we all knew that attacks would be coming. But the speed and the scale of it was absolutely stunning. When I got the news, it was around 8 o'clock at night on that Thursday, and the president of AFGE had called me, the American Federation of Government Employees, who is the largest federal government workers union, that they had this.
Give us some numbers on that, if you wouldn't mind, just so we get a sense of how many people we're talking about.
Yeah, with all the federal government unions together, it's around 700,000 workers. But in the federal government, not every worker that is covered by the collective bargaining agreement belongs as a member. And that's some little known, it's like right to work. I don't know if you're familiar with that phrase, where unions negotiate contracts, better wages, conditions, and all workers are covered, but not all of them, belong to the union and pay dues to sustain the organization. And so the federal government has always been that kind of an environment where the union continues to be a voice for everyone. And so they called me that night saying, the ultimate attack has just happened. And we went into rapid response mode that very night until, the wee hours of the night, standing up calls with our leaders and our lawyers and trying to make sense of what was in the EO and what the impact would be. And then, of course, the next day, emergency call with all of our union leaders to say this is an attack on one is an attack against all, and to make this a sort of movement response. We did a press conference on Capitol Hill. We've been standing up actions in the streets. So we're utilizing all the tools in the toolbox because this is the largest attack against the labor movement in our history. A lot of people point back to the air traffic controller strike being the moment, and this dwarfs that. It is an absolute, like Hamilton said, a Pearl Harbor moment. But we are using every pathway we can find for this fight back. And so, yes, we're filing lawsuits. Of course we are. But we are also in the streets and mobilizing kind of a sort of path to escalation. We've been laddering up from January to February. I think we doubled our actions in the streets and showing up at government buildings and gathering up community and showing up at town hall meetings to hold our congressional elected officials accountable. Even when they don't show up, we have an empty chair. We are a part of this big action this weekend, April 5th, the Hands Off Coalition, of course. And then we're doing what we call sort of escalating tactics, ladders of engagement to educate and ready our union members and workers broadly to take action in all forms.
I'd like to still just dwell on that for a moment, though, because extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. Are there tactics that you would not previously have considered deploying that you will now consider deploying in the face of what you called it, the most significant attack on labor in the country's history? I mean, that is a big statement. It's hard to dispute, and I'm not disputing it. 700,000 workers being told overnight that they no longer are who they said they were and fought hard to win the right to say, we are members of this union. The president is saying, no, you're not. What are some things that you think should be done, including some things that just maybe are previously would have felt we don't need to do that because we see a more diplomatic path to victory, say? What are some things that need to happen now in order to really fight the weight of this action?
Well, and first of all, I will say that AFGE and the other, NTEU and IFPTE and NEFI and all of our federal unions would say that they did not have their union taken away. Their collective bargaining agreement has been destroyed with a stroke of a pen, but they're still going to be fighting as a union. And so we can still obviously have a collective voice and move together to be more powerful. It's just unfortunate that the collective bargaining piece, of course, the EO we think is illegal, and we will fight it throughout the courts. But we're going to continue, as you say, to look at all of our options. And the one thing I do know as a union organizer and as someone who's been around the labor movement, if you pick a fight with one of us, you pick a fight with all of us. And so we are strategizing together collectively. We have turned our whole headquarters into a campaign operation because we know we have to humanize these impacts so that people in the country see this as an attack on them. It affects everybody. It's not just, oh, you work for the federal government, too bad for you. No, this will ripple out across the public sector, across the private sector, and we will be mobilizing with partners and allies and communities all across this country with a very strong toolbox of tactics and strategies that we are working on now. Also, not going to be revealing our playbook in public. It's not probably wise, but we are definitely working strategically to continue to escalate and ramp up our actions. If you know anything about unions, we go on strike. That is our most powerful tool. We do not deploy it at the drop of a hat, and we don't start there. We work up to it. We negotiate, yes. We start using our every tactic and tool that we have and deploying it strategically and working toward the ultimate weapon. So we'll have to see how things play out, and we're going to start educating and mobilizing our membership and working to build those coalitions. We can't, expect people to turn on a dime or take a great risk without having those ladders of engagement.
I'm going to ask one Elon Musk question. Elon Musk, in the last 24 hours, has been reporting that sort of cast into question just how long he is going to be doing what he's doing in the Trump administration. But there's a lot of Elon Musk on your website. This suggests that you see the presence of Musk along with Trump as a valuable boogeyman sort of figure here. Do you think that he is leading to a higher level of energy among your membership than would exist if it was Trump only who kind of represented a lot of these moves?
Absolutely, because nobody elected Elon Musk. He is an unelected billionaire wreaking havoc on our federal government. And this DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency.
I like the way you say that.
There's a lot of other ways of pronouncing it that people have, spin-offs. We have said that no one disagrees that we can find efficiencies in government, but the way they're going about it is absolutely irresponsible. It is a fake department that got stood up and has been given free rein to basically go in and cut government services that people rely on, steal our data with absolutely no guardrails. And we said, wait a second, if you can stand up your fake department, we're going to stand up our own department, the department of people who work for a living. And so we've been using that platform, DPWL, as a place to really interpret and decode what is going on, because most people are working 12-hour days and 2 and 3 jobs and aren't necessarily sure how this affects them. And so on our platform, we're trying to kind of interpret it, but also have it be a place where we can humanize these cuts, because if you think about everything they're going after, not only the jobs, of course, we care about, but the services that impact communities. I mean, if you care about eating safe food, if you care about drinking clean water, if you care about veterans having health care when they come home, you should care about this. And so we have been gathering testimonials so that we can put a human face on what these cuts look like and how they're going to impact people. And in fact, we're going to be doing town halls, almost like Congress does. Our department is going to go out in the field and really bring workers who have been fired, who've been laid off, some of the probationary workers, community members who have been impacted by these cuts, to bring forward what these impacts really are. Because I think most people have a perception that this is some Washington, D.C. related thing that doesn't really affect them. It's absolutely not true. It's going to affect all of us. And in fact, 85% of government workers work outside of Washington, D.C. And so they're your neighbors, they're your family, they're your friends, and they're providing the services that we all count on.
How confident are you that the courts will have your back on this? I mean, there's a lot of different, I have a list here. I'm not going to list them all, but there's a bunch of lawsuits. You just referred to a number of them. But when you look out at the kind of legal playing field, what do you see? And help us understand what you expect out of the legal system in order to kind of push back on this executive order and its implications.
I mean, we still are a country of laws. I mean, I think most people, common sense dictates we cannot have a lawless society and, let this administration just run roughshod over the rule of law. So we still have trust and faith in the legal system, which we have been a party to many lawsuits. We've actually been plaintiffs in lawsuits because we do believe the law will catch up to these illegal actions. We've had some early successes, thank goodness. We filed a lawsuit, I think, the next day after those probationary workers were fired. 25,000 got their rights restored. So that was a big victory. And we also filed a lawsuit when DOGE came after the Department of Labor and tried to access private worker data. These are whistleblowers who have taken risks. These are people who have filed workplace complaints when you have a safety hazard and it's a very vulnerable place to be. So we sued and said, no, we need guardrails. We need to know what you're asking for and have more transparency. We won that lawsuit. Gwen Wilcox, the chair of the National Labor Relations Board, who is the ultimate traffic cop when it comes to workers who want to form a union and their company fires them, the NLRB has to function to be able to restore the people who have taken that risk's jobs. And so we were able to get Gwen restored. Now that's been under appeal, of course, and there's some uncertainty there. But we do believe those lawsuits are our responsibility because we are standing up and defending the rights of working people who have a voice at the table with their unions, but also the many who don't have a voice. And so we'll continue to do that.
Let's talk about the tech industry, which is an industry that we cover a lot at Fast Company, of course. So let's talk about tech, labor, and AI. So there has been a smattering of organizing at some big tech companies, Alphabet / Google, Microsoft, New York Times Tech Guild. but not really much. I mean, relative to other industries that are similar or have similarities. Why do you think the labor movement has not gotten more traction in the tech industry?
I still think there's a stereotype of what a union is and who a union represents. And we're working really hard to demystify that really unions are about the workers themselves deciding what their union looks like and what they prioritize. And so if you think a union is just for someone who works in a steel mill, think again. We actually know that some of the developers that we've talked to, especially in the video game industry, work insane hours with little breaks in conditions that are like the modern day sweatshop in some ways. And that coming together collectively gives you more power and voice, because I think people inherently fear speaking out, especially in an industry where they know there are people lined up behind them to take their job. I think it's on us, frankly, to continue to modernize how people see unions. What are we capable of? And particularly in industries that work differently and are evolving and changing and innovating, unions can actually be evolving and changing and innovating with them. And we've had some early success in certainly Alphabet Workers, and CWA, the Communications Workers of America,
Right.
has a unit within their union that is dedicated to organizing tech workers. And those organizers come directly from the tech sector and can speak the language. And so I think that's another thing that we can be doing, is really learning from the organizers that are actually in the industry itself and teaching us how to organize in a new way that's responsive to the needs of those workers.
A year ago or so, and then I'm not saying this has stopped, but you were pretty focused on AI and how it would disrupt labor, and a lot of things have changed, namely the administration that we've been talking about. Where is your head now on this? How much time are you able to spend on this question of how AI can replace human labor? And just what is your sort of up to the minute, while dealing with everything that's going on here in DC on that question?
I think AI and technology is the new frontier for the labor movement. I think it's going to disrupt work writ large, and that the labor movement really is the only institution that can speak for working people in a way that's not self-interested or conflicted, because, we've had a history of fighting for workers' rights and doing it in a way that is driven by the workers themselves. AI absolutely is something that we think about every day we wake up. We established our Technology Institute within the AFL-CIO a few years back because we saw what was on the horizon. We saw that things like algorithmic management and, worker privacy and data security, not to mention just how work is done. When you check into a hotel and you see those kiosks and you look at the desk agents and you can see what's on the horizon, we need to be responsive, and we need to be using our collective bargaining agreements to bring a worker's voice and perspective upstream in the process, not wait until a job is displaced or it's too late. So we've been absolutely proactive. We have been on the policy front, advocating, of course, in the Biden administration. We had a lot of success getting a worker's seat at the table, having a partnership with the National Science Foundation, which is the innovation lab for the government, to make sure workers are upstream in the development of technology. Because there's so much that we can do, that we see on the front lines of the workplace, that can be value add to those developers and to those innovators. And so we want a seat at the table. We know we're not going to stop technology from changing the way we do work. We just think that it shouldn't dehumanize us. It shouldn't make us poor, and that we should share in the benefits of all this productivity gain that we're going to see in the future.
I am a little skeptical of the tech industry giving you the seat at the table, to be quite honest. I think that the pace of this change is so accelerated. The financial incentive that companies have, clients of these tech companies, to use this technology to lower their overhead and reduce their workforce. You have a partnership that you struck with Microsoft in late 2023, I believe it was, to ensure that workers have a seat at the table. Tell us about that. What is the status of that? What are your expectations for what just brass tacks is really going to happen as a part of that partnership?
You think you were skeptical in terms of hearing about labor and tech coming together on a partnership? I absolutely never would have dreamed that I'd be standing on a stage with Brad Smith announcing that, in 2023. And since then, we have actually embedded workers in the labs at Microsoft. I mean, we have a partnership on AI specifically that we meet with labor leaders twice a year. And then in between those meetings, we're working at a staff level to actually get workers who are on the front lines of the healthcare industry, for example, helping to inform what tech can or should look like in a hospital. Transportation industry, bus drivers who are using, automated buses are, kind of upstream, and that their voices are being heard, and that their expertise is actually being tapped into to make it a responsible use and an informed use that doesn't just land haphazard in a workplace without it being thought through and how it can best benefit working people. Because we want it to enhance our jobs. And I think that's what everybody wants, is to have technology augment our work and actually make things smarter and better and safer and get rid of the jobs that nobody wants to do, right? We have to think through that transition. How do we make sure that workers aren't left behind, that the jobs that we know are on the horizon that are subject to displacement just simply because the technology is getting smarter and faster, that we are transitioning those workers into new jobs and we can train them up into new and better jobs. So I think that's what this partnership is about, is making sure that we're working together on the future and that it's in a way that respects the value of work and the dignity of work, and that, you can't have a future that we all prosper in without bringing workers along with you.
I still have a believe it when I see it a reaction to that, just because I think the tech industry will say things and we'll see what they actually do, but you got to try, and I totally respect that.
I don't know if you think, though, in a moment now where, worker activism is on the rise, people see the handwriting on the wall that we're living in a society that's more and more unequal, that how can you continue to have this runaway wealth, run over people, build these incredibly profitable companies and not see that that is a risk in and of itself to the future?
And I think, look, there may be a lesson there to argue against myself, I suppose, for a moment, Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Anxious Generation, who has been on a crusade against social media's effect on youth in particular. Policy is moving in his direction. I mean, there are schools that are changing their rules around this. He's working on age verification now for social media accounts at all. Some of these things felt like pipe dreams, that there's a runaway train and there's no stopping it. There is some stop in it, or there's at least some arrest in it. So perhaps something similar can happen in the AI space and labor. So Hollywood, you mentioned the writer strikes, SAG-AFTRA, the narrative, and a lot of those people these days, they say the narrative when they're about to say they don't think the narrative is right. I'm not really saying that, but the narrative was certainly that SAG-AFTRA won, got a lot of things that they wanted. 2 years later, you do hear a lot out of Hollywood that no one's working, that's hyperbole, but that the work has not come back post-strike and post-pandemic like a lot of people hoped that it would. With the passage of time, how do you feel about the outcome of the writer's strike, and how is it sort of aging a couple years on?
That strike was seminal because it really did put unions on the map. It put unions on the map as a way to institute guardrails around an industry that people seem to think is impervious, right? That we have all these wealthy companies that are making money hand over fist, producing content. You cannot just run roughshod over the talent that actually makes your industry profitable. And the way we push back is by coming together collectively in our union and using our collective bargaining agreement to put the guardrails and the safeguards in place that can protect that talent. Things like deepfakes. We're all concerned about how images can be manipulated. Using an image without someone's permission seems so basic, but that's what was happening. And so unless you have a tool like a contract where you can sit across the table from these huge companies and bargain those safeguards, then workers will be on their own. And inevitably, that erodes the profession and nobody wins.
During your time as head of AFL-CIO, and even before your time as head, you really prioritize diversifying unions. What do you see as the benefits of a diverse workforce, specifically from an organized labor perspective? And how do you react to and sort of contend with the DEI backlash that we've seen seize corporate America in recent years, not just since, Trump was elected, but prior to that as well?
Well, yes. In the labor movement, we believe that diversifying our workforce is a strength and that we take advantage of the talents across, ethnicities and race and gender and orientation, religion, immigration status. We need the perspectives and contributions of all working people to make us strong. And so the labor movement, of course, we have been a center of gravity, really, for winning those fights over time, instituting policies that bring diverse voices to the table and making sure that women get paid what they deserve in this era where we still have a pay equity gap for women. And I will say, little known fact, the labor movement is the largest organization of working women in the country. And a lot of people don't see us that way. But we've been fighting for pay equity since our inception. And the best way to get an equal paycheck, if you're a woman, is to join a union. But I think now it's our responsibility to continue to fight back and protect the gains that we've made. And it is alarming to see what's happening with these companies who are folding and just canceling their DEI policies without batting an eyelash. And so we're going to continue to work with allies and partners in the civil and human rights space, allies who are saying, let's do a buy-in or I call it a boycott, where we're actually giving business to companies who are respecting policies and standing by them so that we can leverage our consumer behavior and, come together and have a stronger voice.
Your term, hopefully for you, your first term, is up in about a year. Just for the sake of answering this question, let's just say that was going to be your last opportunity to accomplish things. What is most important for you to accomplish in the next year and a few months before your first term is up?
Yeah, I think we're in a unified moment. They always say the best organizer is a bad boss. And that's the moment we're in with this administration. And it has brought such solidarity to our movement where we are coming together, supporting each other, fighting together, strategizing together more than ever before. So my hope is that this next year will be an olive movement moment where we are fighting back in unison and deploying strategies that ultimately we prevail and we win for workers, and the country sees and wakes up and says, you know what, their fight is our fight. I will be running for re-election in 2026, just to be clear. We hope that the labor movement will be seen as an essential pillar of what brings prosperity to working people writ large. That we be the place where you can exercise your frustrations, where you can mobilize and exercise your voice in a powerful way, and that we become the force that is the fight back force for everyone. There really are very few institutions in this country left standing that can mobilize real working people in every city, in every state, in every workplace, in every industry, and that's the labor movement. And so I think people are looking to us to lead in this moment, and we are stepping up to the challenge.
Liz, thank you for talking to me.
Thanks for the opportunity. What a joy to be with you.
Office Hour is part of the Fast Company podcast network. Our show is produced by Yasmin Gagne and Matt Toder. Mix and sound design by Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is Josh Christensen. Be sure to subscribe to Office Hour on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can also hear all episodes in the Most Innovative Companies podcast feed. If you like this podcast, leave us a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, or let us know in the comments of Fast Company's social media.